I titled today's Neville Goddard conversation, Awareness of What is Felt as Real in Relation to Others. In his book, Feeling is the Secret, Neville states, "Think feelingly only of the state you desire to realize, feeling the reality of the state sought, and living and acting on that conviction is the way of all seeming miracles." So there's no one to change but self, and there's only one consciousness that can appear in various ways. The self is formless, and form is given through the state of consciousness occupied. The state occupied determines how people appear in our lives, and at every moment when we imagine others within or outside our physical presence, we are presented with the opportunity to be aware of what we think feelingly upon regarding others or ourselves and or how we relate, for it determines what state out of the infinite states that already exist, what we are about to occupy or currently occupy. I like how he says to not dwell on imperfection of yourself or others. To do so is to impress the subconscious with these limitations. And so now to remain in the ideal state of consciousness, we choose not to think feelingly upon any form of limitation of ourselves, another, or how we relate in any shape or form. Now, I've experienced firsthand over the years the transformations that have occurred by simply imagining others beyond past imaginal limitations. For example, others showing up speaking of ways they have transcended their once self-imposed limitations. And when I talk about my initiatives, there are no feelings of self-imposed limitations reflected in the conversations. This is because people reflect our state, as this is one consciousness, and since there is no one to change but self, our gaze remains inward upon what we are feeling as real in relation to them, and they appear that way. Responsibility of the state occupied is assumed, and God takes care of the rest. The illusion of sole doership is transcended, and all roles are played by God to reflect accordingly, as Neville states. Knowing that at any time that we exercise our imagination lovingly on behalf of another, we are actually and literally mediating God to them. Now, remaining in your ideal state of consciousness, as he mentioned, is being aware as to what we are imagining as true with respect to what appears in relation with others as we go about our life, and this is even true outside of their physical appearance. The question is, are we imagining limitations upon them, or are we imagining them ideally and lovingly beyond limitations? This determines the state we occupy and thus how they appear. You choose how the power is operated by your prayer, which is what you feel as real now, as stated in Matthew 6:6. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So each moment is a prayer by what you feel as real in relation to others, and that is what is done for you. For me, what in the earlier stages seemed like a deliberate practice was replaced with an automatic imaginal activity of feeling as real ideally of myself, others, and how we relate. This is because once a state becomes our dwelling place, how we think, emotionally relate, and behave from that state becomes automatic, reflected as our relationships with others. Actually, it was always automatic, based on the state we occupy, which means different states have different automatic experiences. And so in this regard, we are referring to your chosen state being experienced as automatic. And one may fluctuate through states during the day if they do not remain aware of what they are feeling as real now. So release any beliefs that result in temptation to point outward, as the cause, as we're taught in the Bible, is within. The Father within is said to doeth the work. So do not dwell on the imperfection of yourself or others. It is the dwelling in a not so ideal way that causes one to enter into or remain in a state that is not ideal, from which others appear accordingly. To imagine others ideally is to imagine ourselves ideally, and to imagine ourselves as ideal is to imagine others as ideal, as either way confirms we are remaining in our ideal state of consciousness. The imaginal act is the true confirmation, as he says here. The perfectly disciplined are always in tune with the wish as an accomplished fact. They know that consciousness is the one and only reality, that ideas and feelings are facts in consciousness and are as real as objects in space. 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. So we let the world be, no one to change but self. And by change, I'm referring to the state we occupy. The self is formless, and the self fuses with the state based on what we think feelingly upon, and there are infinite states. States are bodies of beliefs. And so now assume you were, are, and ever shall be ideal in every way possible, regardless of appearances. We let them be and capture the feeling of already being that now, and dwell in and from that state, and they appear that way. As he says, what you do not want done unto you, do not feel that is done unto you or another. I like how he also says that this is the whole law of a full and happy life. Everything else is commentary. So others reflect what we feel as real about self. This is the state we occupy, and they appear based on that state. And by the way, this is from his book, Feeling is the Secret. So again, as we mentioned earlier, he says, the perfectly disciplined are always in tune with the wish as an accomplished fact. They know that consciousness is the one and only reality, that ideas and feelings are facts of consciousness, and are as real as objects in space. Therefore, they do not entertain a feeling which does not contribute to their happiness, for feelings are the cause of the actions and circumstances of their life. On the other hand, the undisciplined finds it difficult to believe that which is denied by the senses and usually accepts or rejects solely on appearances of the senses. From the moment I wake up till I go to sleep, and I like to encourage the same for you, I remain in my ideal state of consciousness because I believe that it is our highest achievement in life, from which all expressions of that state, which include the different areas of our life which we personally would consider ideal, appear automatically as symbols of dwelling in and from that state. As he says, mastery of self-control of your thoughts and feelings is your highest achievement. So it is the imaginal activity, that which we think feelingly upon in relation to others, that determines what state we enter and thus how they show up. And if they're in our physical presence, we are also aware of what state we occupy or what state we are about to occupy based on what we are feeling as real in the moment in relation to them. Now, by remaining in the feeling of your wish fulfilled, everything else happens automatically from that state. Everything is done for you, feeling as real now, like that's the way it is the only responsibility, which is a form of prayer. Whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that you shall have them, and ye shall have them. Mark 11:24. So whatsoever things you desire, capture the feeling of already having it. Notice how it says, believe that you have already received them, as in the feeling that you already have it beyond appearances. Even if the senses seem to suggest otherwise, which let's explore that further. Senses seeming to suggest otherwise, related to this quote here. The undisciplined finds it difficult to believe that which is denied by the senses and usually accepts or rejects solely on appearances of the senses. So throughout life, one may have been accepting as true certain imaginal activity in relation to the stimulus of the senses. To them, the appearances of the senses are what determine the state they occupy. They may then be dependent on the senses to dictate how they feel. Which, if you really go deeper into this, it is what they imagine in relation to the stimulus of the senses that determines what appears next, regardless of if they are aware of it or not. What is being proposed here is to turn it around. Accept the feeling of being how you would like it to be as fact, regardless of the appearances of the senses, to allow the senses to reflect the state as the appearances. Now, you may have noticed that over the last handful of Neville videos, I've been really emphasizing remaining in your ideal state of consciousness, remaining in that feeling, and for good reason. You'll see people relating to you ideally and you relating to them ideally wherever you go. This is because everything happens automatically and ideally from this state, and all one does is make it a priority. Allow the feeling of already being that way to be the priority, regardless of appearances of the senses, and observe how everyone shows up automatically and relates automatically that way. The only way it could change is if we allow our state to change via our own imaginal activity. To commit to and remain in the ideal state of consciousness is to live consciously, as he says here. We must begin to take life consciously, for the solution of all problems lies just in this. The second man, the Lord from heaven in all of us, is trying to become self-conscious in the body, that he may be about his Father's business. What are his labors? To imitate his Father, to become master of the Word, master of his inner talking, that he may mold this world of ours into a likeness with the kingdom of love. And that was from his mental diet lecture. So inner talking or imaginal activity is going on all the time. The one question worth asking is it from the premise of fulfilled desire? If not, think feelingly upon anything from the premise of fulfilled desire to return back into your ideal state of consciousness. And as mentioned earlier, you can enter into your ideal state of consciousness by imagining lovingly of others, which he gives a perfect example here in the mental diet lecture. He says, "How would I send my word to help a friend? I would imagine that I'm hearing his voice, that he is physically present, that my hand is on him. I would then congratulate him on his good fortune, tell him that I've never seen him look better. I would listen as though I heard him. I would imagine that he is telling me he has never felt better. He has never been happier. And I would know that in this loving, knowing communion with another, a communion populous with loving thoughts and feelings, that my word was sent, and it shall not return unto me void, but it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent." So in summary thus far, this is one consciousness. You can feel it as true beyond appearances. This is one consciousness. Thus, to imagine lovingly upon another is to enter into that state. I found it has the same effect as imagining myself back into a chosen state, for example. I'm aware of how I feel prior to interacting with people. If I was not in my ideal state of consciousness, I would imagine myself as being ideal now, and then when I interact with them, they would appear that way. And sometimes I imagine them ideally and enter into that same state. And then I notice that I feel ideal, as in I'm in that state, and they appear that way. This is because in either of the two imaginings, there is no one to change but self. That is, it is what is felt as real that determines how I appear and they appear, and everything happens automatically in correspondence to that chosen state. And again, they appear that way because consciousness is one, and there is no real separation or gap in consciousness. It could only appear that way based on imaginings to the five sensory stimulus. And this can't be overstated, as he mentioned in The Power of Awareness. He said, "The light is consciousness. consciousness is one, manifesting in legions of forms or levels of consciousness. There is no one that is not all that is. For consciousness, though expressed in an infinite series of levels, is not divisional. There is no real separation or gap in consciousness. I am cannot be divided. And so this is why the law works so well in relation to others. People reflect our state because there is no separation or gap in consciousness. We learned this to a certain degree in some of the training programs that I was part of in the earlier stages of my entrepreneurial journey. They would always emphasize, they feel what you feel. And I remember one time I asked them, can they change my feeling? And they replied back with, they feel what you feel. If you feel that something that appears can change your feeling, then that's what you're feeling. And sure enough, I would see it all over the place. If I was in a wonderful mood, people mirrored my state. If my mood was not ideal, people mirrored my state. And you and I know different. You are formless and you give form through the state you occupy. You have all the power to choose your state from which everything happens automatically and naturally for you. Neville says, when you know that consciousness is the one and only reality, conceiving itself to be something good, bad, or indifferent, and becoming that which it conceived itself to be, you are free from the tyranny of second causes, free from the belief that there are causes outside of your own mind that can affect your life. I see the relation here with the video we released on Thursday, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, in which he said in there, a drifter is one who permits himself to be influenced and controlled by circumstances outside of his own mind. The permitting to is the state, and the appearance of it is the reflection of influence and control by circumstances, as the appearances are a reflection of the state of consciousness, as he says. In the state of consciousness of the individual is found the explanation of the phenomena of life. If one's concept of themselves were different, everything in their world would be different. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I am aware of what I feel as real when I imagine others. I choose to feel as real only what I consider as ideal, as others reflect my state. I find it easy to remain in my ideal state of consciousness as I observe how everything is done for me automatically by simply being in my ideal state now. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.